So now we will come to the exact topic that we had practiced, we had rehearsed it in part 2. Now, what was the topic in part 2, the second lesson in speaking? The topic was about restaurants. If you remember, now you've been asked now to speak about restaurants for 2 minutes, in which you have described the restaurant you went to and what was your experience there, what you ate over there, who you went with. So you spoke for 2 minutes on the restaurant and what it means to eat at a restaurant. Now, remember I said to you in the beginning of this lesson that eating at a restaurant is a topic which was there in part 2. It would be there in part 3 also. Whichever topic you have in part 2 will be continued in part 3. So that's what you must remember. So here then we have this topic, eating at a restaurant. So try to practice this topic. Now on this topic, you will be asked some more questions. But remember now these questions will be more general and they will also be more detailed. That is, you will have to give detailed replies to these questions. So let's start with, let's say, first of all, you may be asked, what are the typical restaurants that are most common in your country? Okay, so please try to think of some answer to this question. What are the typical restaurants that are most common in your country? So you can describe some restaurants that are common. You can say there are some local restaurants that serve local food. There are some multi-speciality restaurants, or there are some multinational food joints. You can use these words. Now, we often think about whether we are going to use some words that are typical in our own culture. For example, we might have a typical restaurant in India which is called a dhaba. Now, people often ask, should we use these words from our own languages in our answers? The answer to that is that you can use 1 or 2 words like that, and you can try and explain it. For example, we can say that there is a kind of roadside restaurant in our country, or you can say that there's certain kinds of fast food restaurants in our country. So these are the different kinds of words that you can use. Remember that in the third part of the speaking test, it is your vocabulary that is on display. So you have to use a wide range of vocabulary. So what kind of vocabulary will you use when you describe typical restaurants? You would say some of the restaurants are fine dining restaurants. You know what is a fine dining restaurant? That would be one which is very expensive and it serves very particular sorts of food, gourmet food or special food. So that would be a fine dining restaurant. It's a very formal kind of restaurant. You have to book a reservation for that in advance. But then there are some other kinds of restaurants which are more informal. There may be some roadside restaurants, or there may be some fast food joints, or some small establishments which are meant to cater to people who are working in offices or shops. So in this way, you should be able to describe the typical restaurants that are common in your country. This is how you're supposed to answer a question like that. Then we may move on. The examiner may ask you a question. Is it common for people to eat in restaurants in your country? Now, what will be your answer to that? You could say that it is common. If it is common in your country, you can say that yes, it is common for people to eat in restaurants in our country. People eat in restaurants. Everyone eats in a restaurant every day. People prefer not to cook at home but to eat in restaurants. So there are various answers you can give. But if in your country it is not common for people to eat in restaurants, or you might say that it used to be not very common for people to eat in restaurants. But today, the situation is different. Today, a lot of people like to eat in restaurants. And why do they eat in restaurants? Because of convenience, because they may not have the time to go and buy the food and then to cook it at home, or they may not have the means to do so, or the time or the convenience to do so, and therefore they eat in restaurants in my country. This is common for people to do so. You can also mention the culture in your country, the food culture, because every country has its own food culture. Some countries have a food culture where there is a lot of street food, where there are lots of restaurants that outside they are there in the street. Now, people don't even consider that to be a restaurant. They don't even consider it as eating out. It is just a very much an ordinary, everyday activity for them. But for other people, or maybe for people in some other cultures, going to a restaurant may be a very special occasion. That is only on special occasions, for example, a party or an occasion like a birthday or a wedding, that they might go to eat in a restaurant. So there can be different situations. And what do you have to do? You have to describe all these situations. As was mentioned to you earlier in this lesson, this kind of question means that you have to describe what people do, how often they do that, why do they do that, why do they eat in restaurants, how often do they do that, how often do they, is it on occasions that they eat in restaurants or only rarely, how does it relate to the culture of people, do people think it is hygienic to eat in restaurants or not? So these are the things that you will discuss in answer to this question. So you can see how detailed the answer will become. You will have to answer in detail. So the examiner would listen to that answer very patiently. And then we'll move on to the next question. What is the difference between food served in a restaurant and food made at home? All right. So this is just developing the same set of questions, that is developing that topic to include more and more aspects of that topic. Okay. So what is the difference? This is a comparison type question. Okay. What are you required to do here? You are required to compare the food served in a restaurant with food made at home. So you can say, while the food served in a restaurant is such and such, food made at home is such and such. Or you can say, as contrasted with foods or as compared to food served in a restaurant, food made at home is more whatever. All right. So you can compare the two kinds of activities and two kinds of food. Then the examiner will go on to the next question. Are there any changes in the eating habits of people in recent times? So here again, you can mention so many things. You can talk about the processed foods. You can talk about the way in which people don't spend so much time in cooking, or that they may be eating more of one kind of food or drinking more of one kind of drink rather than another. And there may be eating habits. For example, people used to eat in a group earlier, in community, with the entire family sitting together. But maybe in recent times, people do not eat together. Maybe different people, even in a family, eat at different times, and so they don't sit together. That is a change in their eating habits. So you can mention some examples over here. You can say, for example, in our country or in our family, we do not eat together because everybody is doing different jobs and they come at different times of the day. Or you could say that for example, in our family, we make sure that we eat at least one meal of the day together, where the whole family sits together to eat. So you can give any answer which tells the examiner about the eating habits. So you can give examples here, either from your own society or from people you know or your friends or your family, anything that you are familiar with. So this kind of answer is right over here. Then you can go on to answer this question. Do you consider that going to restaurants is important? Is it useful for social interaction? So again, this shows us the attitudes of people. It shows us the changing trends that are there in social life. How earlier on people used to entertain at home, and no matter what the number of guests, how many guests there are, people would still entertain at home. But today, perhaps it is considered right to entertain people in restaurants. Sometimes for purposes of business or for professions or other kinds of meetings, people go to restaurants and they have that social interaction in those restaurants. So whatever you wish to say about the importance of going to restaurants, whether it's important for social interaction, whether it's important for people to get together, whether it's important for people to, or convenient for people, and that is why they go to restaurants. So why is it important for society? And, there is an economic factor also, that we talk about restaurants as being part of the hospitality industry. So we can say that this is a full-fledged industry, and it caters to a number of people in society, various groups in society, be they young people, be they older people, be they professionals or business people. Everybody makes use of restaurants, and that restaurants offer hospitality, plus they are also a part of the economy, and they are an important part of the service industry or of the economy. So that's why also they are important. So going to restaurants is important because it sustains the economy as well. It sustains the way that it encourages the way that people meet and get together, and also, of course, the people who are employed over there, such as the different people like the cooks and the service personnel, all those people they get jobs through that, so that is part of the economy. I mean, this is just an example of a point that you can make. So try and practice saying these things, talking about it in this way. Then what are the factors that contribute to the success of a restaurant? Okay, here you can again mention various things. You can say, is it the location of a restaurant in a prominent place? Is it the food in a restaurant, the quality of food in the restaurant, or the quality of service in a restaurant? So you can mention various things and answer this question. What kinds of restaurants could be popular in the future? Now, this type of question is what has been mentioned to you earlier as the speculative question. That is, what might be the case in the future? What could happen in the future? So this kind of answer would be just purely hypothetical. Okay, you can say, well, in the future we could have restaurants which are like this, or you can just kind of imagine something. You can just imagine something. Perhaps we have restaurants in the sky, or perhaps we have restaurants under the water, and things like that. You can just imagine something to give an answer that it is likely that in the future, so you can start your sentence like this: it is likely, or it is possible that in the future, and carry on with the rest of it. Restaurants could be here or of this kind. So this is how you have to formulate your sentences. So here now we will then say that practice the topics given.